Today's episode is brought to us by CS Instant Coffee, the best coffee for any adventure you're going to go on. Use the code ADVENTURE at csinstant.coffee and get 50% off through September and October. So give it a shot. And we're also brought to you by Roam Products. They make elastic knit, minimalist style wallets with all sorts of designs. Get 20% off the perfect minimalist wallet for all your adventures. It'll hold everything you need by going to wheredouroam, ROAM.com, and use the code podcast with a capital P at checkout.
Throwing the line, or when you're casting the line, the rod is loading up with that mass and flinging it out. And that's what sends the line, the leader, the tippet, the fly out into the water.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, trying to help you find adventure every day in any stage of life. You're going to hear from explorers, adventurers, business owners, and anyone living their life a little more out of the box than usual. Hey folks, as you probably noticed last week, we didn't have a Friday episode, and I announced a few episodes ago, we're only going to be doing 2 episodes a week from now on, Monday and Thursday, and it's going to be a combination of revisited and brand new episodes. We're going to try to get as many brand new episodes out as possible, and we've gotten a lot of requests for fishing episodes recently, so if you know anybody in the fishing world, just reach out and have them get on the show, and we'll interview them. But until then, here's a revisited episode for fly fishing specifically that Kurt did a few years ago. And also, before we get started, I wanted to mention we have a new sponsor. You probably noticed that. It's Roam Products. They make wallets and silicone rings. It's like minimalist backpacking wallets. It's great. I hate how big and bulky my leather wallet was, so I was looking for something that was smaller. But yeah, my wallet's really tiny now. It's perfect. Can't stand having that big old wallet in my pocket all the time. So I'm happy to make that change. And also they make silicone rings. I have been a proponent of silicone rings, wedding bands forever. After I almost got my finger ripped off falling off a ladder when I had my tungsten one on. So yeah, I'll never be wearing a metal ring ever again after that experience. So check them out. Use the code PODCAST, capital P, to get 20% off. I just really like the products. I chose Yosemite Valley wallet because I love Yosemite. There's a ton of designs. Check them out. But I just wanted to introduce them and welcome them to the Adventure Sports Podcast community. All right, enough of me blabbering. Here's the episode.
Hello and welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is your host, Kurt Linville. I have a fly fisherman with us today, and I know some of you are going to say, fly fishing? Is that an adventure sport? But I have said on previous shows, I argue it is an adventure sport because of the amazing way it gets you out into nature and the adventure travel that you can have with it and how it encourages people to get into the backcountry to do a lot of things. It's just an alternative way to encounter nature and have amazing adventures. And so we're going to explore that today with John Hogins. John grew up in San Diego, California. He spent several years in Sacramento. He had a brief stay in Colorado and Kansas, but now he's in Texas in a town called Woodway. And the reason I bring that up is he is an avid fly fisherman in Texas. So a lot of fly fishermen out there think trout, cold water fish, rushing streams. Well, John learned to fly fish that way, but he took his love for fly fishing to Texas and now does warm water fly fishing. And he has a lot to tell us about that might open up the sport to a whole lot of you who don't have access to those cold water streams. So that's a long intro there, John, but welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you, Curtis. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here to talk about fly fishing, the adventurous side of it, and to get a little bit more in-depth. I mean, I think this warm water fly fishing is fascinating because not everybody lives in a cold water climate. But we'll come back to that.
Right.
For starters, how did you get started fly fishing?
So I'm 50 years old, and back when I was in grade school, I was like 11 or 12 years old, my dad took me on a float trip on the Madison River up in Montana. And previously, I had not been fly fishing, just regular rod and reel. My dad had been. He'd been fishing since the 60s, fished all up through the Sierras, the eastern Sierras, at Hot Creek and Bishop. Anyways, we went on a trip to Montana, a 3 or 4 day trip, and I was hooked. It was just an amazing experience. I still have those vivid images of going down the river on the big float boats and catching fish that seemed bigger than I was.
Oh yeah.
And getting back home, all I could think about from then on was when our next trip would be and where we could go fishing next. So, yeah, I guess nearly 40 years of fishing, of fly fishing.
That's awesome. So then I assume that you and your dad did a lot more fly fishing in California.
Yeah, so we didn't do much saltwater or warm water fishing around San Diego. We would typically plan for a trip in the summers. He was a professor at a local college, San Diego Mesa College, and in the summers, of course, he'd have some time off, and we would plan big trips somewhere, whether it was to Montana, Colorado, up into the Sierras. Always plan at least one big trip, backpacking or packing in with horses or something every year, and just plan for it the rest of the year and enjoy it while we could during that week or two that we were out on the water.
See, that's a perfect example of why I say that fly fishing is an adventure sport.
Mm-hmm.
So some people, they have the iconic view of the guy standing knee deep in waders, and he's got this beautiful line arced out over his head, and it's a peaceful scene, and maybe the guy's 65 years old, and people are saying, yeah, that's what I'm going to do someday when I can't do this other stuff. And I just feel like that image, while it's accurate, is not accurate because fly fishing has become a young person's sport, and it leads people into such amazing adventures to connect with nature. It's not that kind of river runs through it scene necessarily, unless you're talking about the one where the guy's swimming down the rapids with a fish on the line.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but right, it gives you the chance to get out into areas that typically other people aren't. It's something to do when you go camping or hiking or such. It's a destination or an activity along the way.
Right.
Some of the most incredible spots that I've seen have been on a fly fishing trip and getting out away from the roads and the people and the others, and experiencing everything from the quietness of nature and the ripple of the stream to seeing wildlife that you typically wouldn't ever see. Moose and bear, bobcats. You name it. You'll never know what you're going to see, especially in areas like Yellowstone or the Upper Sierras. It's just it is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And John, you and I spoke earlier. You know that I fly fish with my guys, my sons, and one son in particular is just an avid fly fisherman. Man, is he good. Daniel is amazing. But we always take the fly rods when we go backpacking, and for me, it's a backpacking trip. That's just where I'm focused. For Daniel, It's a fishing trip.
Yeah.
that he goes backpacking on.
I understand that.
But that's great because it works. So, we have so much fun doing that, and it's such an easy thing to throw a lightweight fly rod in your pack.
Yeah.
And you have entertainment and camp that way, but you might also have food that you can add to that dehydrated food that you had to eat on the trail along the way. And so I just think it's a wonderful complement to getting out into nature in any way that you want to do it. Matter of fact, this is one we haven't done yet, but we're planning, is a mountain biking trip where we bike into areas to go fly fishing. We think that'd be a fun way to go about it because you can just go so much farther and deeper, quickly on a bike.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, we're going to do that.
Is that in Colorado? Is that where you're planning?
Well, yeah, Colorado is our target because that's home for us. But I imagine that people could do that in lots of places. It's just a matter of finding the right mountain biking trail that goes near water.
Yeah.
And then goes far enough that it's worthwhile,
There's actually here in Woodway, we're part of Waco, and Lake Waco has a bunch of little parks around it with some great mountain biking trails. And surprising, right in the middle of Texas, you can't believe there'd be mountain biking trails, but there's some great ones. And one in particular follows along a little stream that dumps down into Lake Waco. And white bass will shoot up the river, largemouth, bluegill, all kinds of warm water fish like to run up that river. And just like you're saying, you can take your mountain bike and kind of cruise around down through there and stop along the way and fish and just have a blast. It's combining the two sports, mountain biking and fly fishing. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I even saw a video of a couple of guys that were cross-country skiing into their fly fishing. And I thought, there's another way. It is a winter sport. People think of fishing as a summer sport, but if the water's flowing, you can fish it.
Fish don't hibernate. They continue to move and eat. So as long as they're active, you can catch them.
Yeah, absolutely. I found in the wintertime, when the water's really cold, sometimes you almost have to hit them in the nose with your fly before they're going to make any effort to grab it, but they're still there, and it adds a little added challenge to it. But hey, we've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves because I want to talk about what fly fishing is. So we have a lot of listeners that know what fly fishing is. We have some avid fly fishing listeners who could, tell us how to do it. But there are other people who have never done it before, and they're like, well, what's a difference between a fly rod and a regular casting rod, and why would I do one versus the other?
Right. So I think for, maybe breaking it down to the warm water fishing, typically guys who are going after freshwater bass, largemouth bass, which is probably the most common warm water species that people go after, you're hunting these fish with pretty large lures, whether they're plastic or soft plastic or hard plastic. And that's the idea, is that the bigger the lure, kind of the bigger the fish you're going to catch. It's an aggressive sport. You're using, nearly 20-pound test line, the strength of the line. Whereas with fly fishing for bass, it's a little bit, I don't want to say delicate, but it is just a different technique with it, where you're trying to get their attention with a lighter, smaller lure, lighter weight line. It's definitely similar. You're trying to catch a fish, but it's just with the equipment is a little bit different, and there's a lot more finesse involved. You're trying to get the fly right there in front of the fish and simulate the natural movement of whether it's a streamer or a topwater popper, which might simulate like a frog or a bug on top of the water. And you're trying to accurately, portray this insect or this bug in the water to get the fish to get his attention and get his excitement to it. It's interesting when you think about the differences between the two sports, and yet they do combine quite often. I'll say that because my youngest son, he loves to bass fish using plastics and just your regular rod and reel style fishing, and he is a great fisherman. But there are occasions where he's not catching them, and he will switch to a fly. And for whatever reason, a small fly or something that maybe simulates something that they've been eating or that is hatching in the area, and boom, start catching them. And if I knew exactly when and what that was, Curtis, and how that happens, boy, I'd be a millionaire. But it just, for whatever reason, sometimes that fly fishing is on, and that's what the bass want. But anyways, I don't know if that answers the question or
No, that's great. I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying there is that when you're fishing with a regular rod and reel, often you're trying to flash something at the fish. Sometimes you're even trying to make it angry so it attacks your lure. It's not really, this is a natural thing. It's more of a, I'm in your face and I'm flashing and you're angry about it and you're territorial and you're going to come after it. But when you throw a fly out there with a fly rod, now you're trying to say, this is the food you eat. This is what you're looking for every day. And you're trying to make it look natural and match what's going on in the local ecosystem with those fish.
That's right.
That's different.
It is different. And if you ever have the chance to get in the water, get under the water and watch a bass or a bluegill or something eat or chase after a fly, it helps kind of give you the understanding of what or how they see it, and any kind of wrong movement that you put into the fly, unnatural movement, they'll lose attention. And every time you throw that same fly back to them, they'll know instantly, hey, that's not real. But if you throw the fly in there and get it to have the natural movement of whatever bug or worm or whatever it is that you're imitating, and man, you can see them. They look at it and they can see it. You see it computing in their mind that, hey, that's food. Okay, I'm going to watch it. Yep, that's food. Bam, they're on. And to see that in the water, and one of the great things about being in Texas, when late spring, early summer, the water temperatures upper 70s, low 80s, and geez, like bath water practically. It is a lot of fun to get in the water and watch the fish going after flies. We do it many times where we don't even put a hook on. Just tie a fly and put it on a string and a stick or whatever and throw it out there. Sounds silly now I'm talking about it, but it is a lot of fun. And you learn to see how the fish react to the fly, see what their interest is and how the behavior of the fly in the water will get their attention.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just to kind of substantiate what you're saying there, I went fishing up in Rocky Mountain National Park, I guess it was 2 summers ago, but there was a tiny little trout, a little brook trout, and he wasn't interested in anything. So I tied about 5 or 6, maybe more, different types of flies onto my tippet and tried to get this guy's attention. And he would see it laying on the water, and if I had the right technique, which I still work on, and got it to land the right way, he'd come up to it, but then he'd go away again.
Right.
And so most people would say, well, the fish aren't biting. But I had heard from my son, no, you just have to do the right thing. I finally put the right fly on that line, threw it out there, and bang, he grabbed it. But it probably took me 45 minutes to attract one tiny, he's only 6 inches long, but I thought that was fun.
Yes,
that was fun.
That is. That's part of the sport of it. It's the adventure of it, the treasure hunting of it, is being able to do that and to get the fish to finally bite and catch them. And like you said, it's 6 inches. At least you see them, and a lot of people say, what the heck are you doing catching a 6-inch fish? But it's all of it combined, right? It's not just being able to throw something out there and catching them. You can do that with a net or whatever. It's part of that experience of watching the fish look at the lure as it's going by, or the fly as it's going by, kind of seeing in his mind, what is he thinking? What is he looking at? What is he? And then that gives you the next time. Okay, well, he kind of came up to it, but then he swam away. So maybe this time I'm going to twitch it a little and see if that sparks his interest. Or like you said, tying another fly that really gets his attention. So, man, a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt. So describe the difference between just regular rod and reel casting versus line casting with a fly rod. That's a big difference too.
Yeah, right. So line casting with a fly rod, you're using the weight of the line itself, as opposed to when you're regular rod and reel, you're using the weight of the lure or added weight, next to the lure to throw it out there. With a fly rod, the line itself that you use up until the end, about 7 feet away from the end where your fly is weighted and has mass. So when you're throwing the line or when you're casting the line, the rod is loading up with that mass and flinging it out, and that's what sends the line, the leader, the tippet, the fly out into the water. So yeah, there's some mechanics involved. There's some physics involved that you have to kind of get set to. However, it's also as simple as a roll cast, where you just stick your rod straight up in the air and kind of push it out forward, and that momentum flings the line and the lure out into the water. There's all kinds of different techniques to fly fishing, or to the art of casting. Those different techniques come in handy when you're in different places. Like if you're in a creek or in a stream bed that has a lot of brush or trees along the sides, and you can't get a big long cast going, or you have to watch your back cast, then a roll cast or just being able to flick the fly out, is important to learn how to do. So all those different techniques that you have to learn and understand. To a fisherman, to someone who wants to enter the sport of fly fishing, they think, or they see on YouTube, all these different techniques and all this different styles and ways of doing things, can be pretty intimidating. But the basics of it is very simple, and kids pick it up really quickly, I think. And it's something that if you practice a few minutes in your backyard or out on a pond somewhere, you're good to go. It doesn't take very long. It takes a while to master some of the techniques, and to keep from getting your line, in a crow's nest, which I still do all the time. But it's something that you can learn quite quickly and start fishing right away, without a doubt. It's nothing that you should be intimidated by any means.
It's not always possible to take a French press or a coffee maker out in the woods with you, but thankfully now you don't have to, because there is a great option in CS Instant Coffee. They make 100% Arabica instant coffee in compostable packaging. It's perfect for the outdoors or whenever you don't have the time to make a fresh pot. And right now, you can save 50% on your first order by going to csinstant.coffee and using the code ADVENTURE at checkout. One of my new favorite pieces of gear is actually my wallet, and that's because it's been inspired by Simplicity by Roam Products. It's a minimalist style wallet, holds my cash, my cards, holds it really tightly because it's elastic, and it's probably eliminated my wallet size down by 60 to 70%. They offer a variety of designs from artistic to patterns, and they're machine washable if they get dirty. They come with a little carabiner so you can clip it to things like your keys or your lanyard, and they also offer a complete line of silicone rings with a variety of styles and colors. So if you're tired of carrying around a big bulky wallet, go to wheredoyouroam, ROAM.com, and use the code PODCAST with a capital P at checkout for 20% off.
I grew up fishing with my grandparents, and as a little kid, it was always a bobber with a worm hanging on the bottom of it, with a hook. And as a little kid, I looked at that, and I'd watched that bobber for about 60 seconds. I thought an hour had gone by, and I'm ready to do something else.
That's right.
But then I started using lures and cast fishing with a regular rod and reel. And that was a lot more fun because it was more active. I could throw it out there and reel it back in. But then after a while, that starts to feel pretty common too, But when I tried fly fishing for the first time, I realized, wow, that just the casting itself is so much more elegant and elaborate that it created a whole new challenge to the sport. I mean, this may be silly, but it's kind of like rolling the perfect bowling ball to get a strike. The perfect cast is elusive. Now, you can get the line out there without a lot of training, but to get that perfect cast with the right presentation at the right place in the water where you know that fish is, that's half the sport, and that's part of the fun. You know, that's to me, it's much more entertaining than any other style of fishing.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with you there. Absolutely. To be able to place a fly exactly where you want it is such a challenge. You have so many different factors. You know, it could be the weather, the wind, rain. You know, it could be anything involved with your gear. Like we talked about the line that you use. At the end of the line, you typically have the weighted line. You have the leader, and then you have a tippet, and at the end of that, of course, you have your fly. And all that, you know, has to be placed correctly to get the fly right where you want it. And if any of that decides to go one way or the other, or you know, who knows what, it makes it quite challenging. Now, when you do get your fly, you know, if you got 30 feet of line out, and it just seems like once you get into that rhythm and you hit one spot, for some reason that muscle memory or your brain does something, and boom, it's like you have it. You're in the zone, and you know your next 10 casts or so are just like perfect. Then for whatever reason, there's always something, it seems like, that gets into me at least, and I think about it, or something happens, and then I'm, you know, back to, oh geez, you know, slapping the water again.
Right. Well, that's me. Absolutely. Daniel, I mean, he can put it where he wants it most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, the vast majority of the time. He doesn't miss much. But
yeah,
man,
awesome.
for me, it's just exactly what you said. It's like, oh, that worked. Do it again. And sometimes it happens. That's
I know,
fun.
it's crazy. And yeah, I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing this for, you know, 35, 40 years, and you know, maybe it's just me, I'm not talented or something, but I still struggle with finding that perfect cast with the heavy stuff. Now, you know, a lighter rod, like a 3-weight rod with a little tiny, you know, 20 weight fly on the end of it, yeah, no problem. But these bigger, you know, my 9-foot rod, like 5-weight, when I'm throwing a pretty big bass lure, it's difficult. It really is. And that's part of the challenge, is to not have the lure hit the water so hard that it spooks the fish in a wrong way. You want it to hit the water and then excite them, not freak them out like, you know, aliens are landing on them or something.
And if you catch one, then for sure they think they've been abducted.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder that. Yeah, what do they think about that when they, you know, get pulled out of the water and sent back in to tell their buddies what happened? Exactly.
Well, hey, tell us a story about one of these fishing trips with your dad. I really want to hear what it was like as a kid to go into the wilderness and the experiences that you had.
Actually a couple real quick. One where we went into the Eastern Sierras with a guide, Ralph Cutter, and I think that trip was back in the 80s. It was a mule trip, so we packed in. I think we were gone for about 5 or 6 days, hit a bunch of small lakes and streams, and it was a teaching, learning, you know, fishing trip where during the day the guide was taking us to areas and helping us, you know, select the flies. And then the evenings, it was, if we wanted, those of us, it was a fly tying. So sitting around the campfire and, you know, showing how to tie flies out in the, you know, out on the campsite. And that was the first time I, on the trip, caught a golden trout, which was pretty awesome. So get to mark that one off. Now, one particular trip that my dad and I had planned for, you know, all year, it was we were going to take pack animals into Yellowstone and fish. One of the rivers we were fishing was the Pelican River. and we had hired a guide. Like I said, planned all year for it. Can't wait for school to get out. This was back in the 80s again. And, get up there. We had, I think it was 2 days in. The first night, it hailed on us, rained on us. We didn't get to fish. And we, spent most of the time in the tents and just trying to keep dry. The second day, we had made it to the Pelican River. As the guide and his hand were setting up the campsite, my dad and I went down to the river and started fishing. And just beautiful, beautiful fish, brooks and rainbows and browns, and nice, beautiful area, big meadow. And I would say probably after in my mind, I'm thinking an hour. It might have been shorter, longer. Park rangers show up on horseback and ask us what we're doing. And we're saying, we're fishing. Say, well, you can't fish here. You're about a week early. The fishing season on this river doesn't open for another week.
Uh-oh.
So the guide screwed up. He didn't check his schedule, or he didn't check something. And that was our whole fishing trip, was to be on that river. So we were done for the most part, and had to pack it in and head back. Luckily, the guide was really cool, and his boss knew of some private lakes up in the hills that they took us to. So the story didn't end terribly bad, but the point of it was, we had planned all year long to fish this river, but we didn't check to see, exactly when the season opened. We assumed the guide knew. That was his job, but he didn't. And so we didn't get to fish like we wanted to, unfortunately. So yeah, always check the rivers, streams, lakes, wherever you're at. Make sure you understand the season. The area that you're fishing in may be barbless, maybe all kinds of different regulations, how many can keep or not keep or whatever. So that's really important to understand when you're out and about, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Had you gone and had it been the correct season, and had you fished and not caught a thing, the fact of the matter is you still went, and you went into an amazing area, and you got to be out there and see the beauty of it and do something.
And we still talk about that trip as one of our favorites, which in a strange way, because the first night when we were there, we thought a 747 was flying over us out in the middle of nowhere in Yellowstone Park. And it might have been a tornado or something. I don't know. It was the craziest sound ever heard. The next night when we made it to the Pelican, when we were sleeping there that night, we had buffalo roaming around our tents and eating along our tent line and everything. I mean, it's experiences like that are just, you'll never forget them. And then when the trip was over, fishing fishing in the Yellowstone or in Yellowstone Park, we still had the opportunity to go fishing some small lakes that we never would have been to, or never would have thought to go to or to try, and just had a great time. So, you're absolutely right. It's just being there and doing it, and all that is part of the adventure and part of the fun, for sure.
Well, and that's what adventure is. It's not what you planned. It's what happens when you planned other things that makes the adventure an adventure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about warm water fly fishing, because, I kind of baited all of our listeners with that at the beginning. I think a lot of people don't think of fly fishing in warm water settings, but it's becoming a thing now, and you're telling me that it's just a ton of fun.
It is. Here in Texas is a perfect example, because it is warm here in Texas, and the waters get quite warm. I'd say there's three different styles of fly fishing in three different waters, right? You have the rivers and creeks and streams as one. You have lake fishing, and you have pond fishing. So many ponds around Central Texas. Most of them are privately owned, but, become friends with a landowner, and access is pretty easy to get. The stream fishing and the river fishing in Texas, it's nothing like in the Rockies or the Sierras. Obviously, very different. The water being warm has different styles of fish. Your bass, your sunfish, bluegill, and catfish and such. But the bass and the bluegill are some of the funnest fish to catch on a fly rod. The closest river to us is the Brazos, and it winds its way from up by Possum Kingdom down to the coast by Houston. And right in between where we're at, there's a stretch below Whitney. It's probably 8 miles or so. You can kayak it, canoe it, wade it. But the fish in there, the whites and the smallmouth and the largemouth bass are just super fun to catch on a fly rod, and it's pretty easy to catch them. You only need a few different style of flies. The woolly booger, which everybody fly fish knows of, the popper, which is a very common topwater, and a streamer like a Klaus or minnow. If you have those 3 flies, you're going to catch fish on the river. That's probably the biggest river around, or creek or whatever. There's lots of little creeks that flow into the lakes around here. We have the Bosque. There's 3 branches: the south, middle, and north. And kayaking or wading up through those, you'll find pools that only have to be 2 feet deep, and they're going to have a handful of bass or bluegill in them. Little creeks that flow through subdivisions and through areas that have been developed. People overlook them, but they can be a super fun way of getting out and catching sunfish. There's one particular one nearby here that goes right by our house and then down behind the high school here. And never see anybody fishing it, but there are tons of 6-inch to smaller sunfish, pumpkin seeds, bluegills, red ears, all those different hybrids, warmouths. I mean, just every type of sunfish you can think of probably lives in that little stretch. And catching them on a fly rod is not the only way to catch them, but is probably the easiest because you can deal with such little flies that they're interested in. And it's year round. The water's flowing year round, and those fish are moving year round. They're active year round. I don't think there's been a month that we haven't, maybe December or January, just because we're too cold to go out. But for the most part, you can go out and catch a fish anytime here in Central Texas. Now, of course, springtime and in the beginning of summer, the fish are so active that it's hard to keep them off the off the lines. But for the rest of the year, absolutely, whenever you want to go out and catch a fish, you can. And again, with fly fishing, it opens up more opportunities, I think, because you can deal with little tiny flies to catch the little fish. So, yeah, that's the basics of it, Curtis. I encourage anyone that is interested in fly fishing to try it around their home or an area near their home. A lot of cities have parks that have ponds, and you check with the local city manager, but most likely they'll let you fish in them, and it's a great place to try fly fishing and to start fly fishing. Up in where my oldest son lives in Plano, there's several ponds right near his house that you see people playing soccer and catching frisbee and flying kites all around, but hardly ever see people fish in the ponds, and there's fish in them, and we've caught them. It doesn't have to be hike 10 miles into the wilderness, which is fun. It can be ride your 10 speed down to the local local pond and have a blast too.
That's neat. I keep coming back to bluegill in my mind. I mean, I can't imagine having a big bass on a fly rod. I know that would be fun.
Oh, yeah.
But the reason I keep coming back to the bluegill is because that's what I fished for as a kid in the streams where I grew up. And I just can't imagine. I've never caught a bluegill on a fly rod, but I think it would be a blast to be able to do that. They're just such a different fish, very aggressive. And, man, they're fighters. It doesn't take a big one to put up a huge fight.
It would blow your mind after, pulling it in that, wow, that little fish put up that fight. What? Yeah, absolutely. And, Curtis, some of the ponds around here, the bluegill get huge. A full 1 pound bluegill, you'll think you have a 10-pound trout on. I mean, they are crazy aggressive. There's so many different kinds of sunfish or bluegill, and I think the ones that they're all interesting to catch without a doubt, and some of the little ones, the ones that are 4 inches, 3 inches, 2 inches long, they're so colorful, and it's like an aquarium fish. When you look at them and study them, they're just absolutely beautiful. And like I said, they're aggressive. They're not like some fish that will get on and just go straight to the bottom and lay there and you just reel them in. I mean, they fight. You think of a big largemouth dancing out of the water trying to spit the lure out of his mouth or something. I've actually seen a little bluegill just sail out of the water. Just 2 or 3 feet out of the water, just going nuts trying to get the fly out of their mouth or whatever it is. And yeah, it is a lot of fun. Absolutely.
Well, John, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here.
Okay.
You do work for Taiga Coolers.
That's right.
And that's Taiga Coolers is spelled Taiga. And I'm always jealous when I find someone like you who gets to work for such a cool outdoor-focused company. But Taiga Coolers, they make high-end coolers for people that want to use coolers for fishing and all that other kind of stuff. Tell us about that.
Taiga Coolers, like you said, they're high-end, up to 7-day ice retention, 3 inches of R5 insulated foam blown into them. So they're very, very high-end coolers. And the purpose of them was to go after the guides and guys that are going out on their boats for several days and need ways to keep your beer and other things cold for a long period of time. They're not an igloo cooler. They are a very high quality, durable, super strong cooler. And the neat thing about these particular coolers or Taiga coolers are that you can customize them. So let's say you have a business and you want to promote your brand or your storefront or whatever it is, and you have your certain colors that you want. We can match any color you can think of for the coolers. And the outside, the lid, the interior, any of it can be custom colors. We also have the ability on the front of the cooler to emboss your logo. So it's not just like a decal, it's actually molded into the front of the cooler. Whatever logo, saying, whatever it is that you want, we can put that into the front of the cooler. So they're great promotional items, and besides that, they're great for the adventure seeker who needs a way to keep their food and drinks cold for up to 7 days.
7 days. So the coolers I always used when I would go out like car camping or something, it was like the 7-hour cooler, right? So you put everything in there and you say, okay, we're going to eat anything that spoils first,
right?
Because it's not going to keep. But I love this. We have a lot of river runners that have been on the show that do extended trips. You're talking about keeping a steak good for up to 7 days and having steak on the last night of the river.
There you go.
And that is awesome.
Absolutely.
What about the mule guides, the guys that are pack muling in? Same story.
Same story. And again, these coolers they're not lightweight coolers. I mean, it's not something that you're going to, you and your buddy carry up 30 miles into the wilderness by hand. I mean, that's not what they're meant for. They're meant to, like you said, be packed in or be part of your gear when you're driving in. But yeah, put it on the side of a mule with the 27 or 55 quart, put the steak on the bottom, beer on top of that, and ice on top of that, and you're good. The other side, kind of nice about like the 27 quart, which is a little smaller size cooler, it's perfect for like your stand-up paddle boarders. Strap it down, fasten it to the board. It's great for a seat, and then you have the storage. You put rod holders on the sides. You can put other storage attached to the cooler on it. You can put a swivel seat on it, put a bench seat on it, put a recliner on it, whatever you wanted. But it's tough enough that you can, stand on it, sit on it, and it's locks and seals. So if you do tip the board over or something, you're not gonna lose what's inside of it, or you're not gonna get water gushing in and ruining maybe what you had inside of it either.
I'm thinking about all of our canoers out there.
Yeah, son and I, we have a 2-man canoe, and that's what we bring with us is the 27 quart. You can be out on the river, on the lake all day long and have enough water and food and supplies in the cooler for sure. Or they fit nicely behind, some of these little bit wider kayaks, especially a fishing kayak. They're perfect for right behind the seat. You can strap them in.
So these things are the real deal. It's what I like about them. Something you can depend on, you can stand on. It's going to take the abuse, and it's going to keep your food cold for a long, long time.
That's right. The bigger coolers were somewhat also designed for your hunters who, maybe they're packed in a couple days in and are able to, need a way to bring the meat back. The bigger coolers are perfect for that. You have an 88 quart that's pretty big and can obviously hold quite a lot of meat in it.
But there's a big variety in here.
Yeah, all kinds of variety. I mean, but again, I think for the coolers that the biggest, difference from others is just our ability to customize them.
I'm just kind of laughing here. I'm looking at your 88 quart Taiga cooler. And I was thinking, you mentioned sport teams. I was just thinking that's the cooler to dump on the coach when you win the game, right there.
That's it. Yeah.
That's 22 gallons. Holy cow.
Yeah, that is a monster. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, you think about, that can hold, 96 cans and ice. And with it, it's the cooler itself is not light. They're not meant to be light. They're heavy duty and, have a purpose to them. They're designed. Well, yeah, we didn't even talk about that. They're made here in Texas, so that's a U.S., 100% USA made product. There's a lifetime warranty on them. Wayne often says that, if something's wrong with it, send it back and no questions asked. Unless you tell us that you're trying to shoe an elephant on it or something like that, we're going to question it. But otherwise, yeah, we'll replace it without any question. So,
oh, that's cool. Taiga Coolers was kind enough to offer a special for the Adventure Sports listeners. What is that, and how can they find more information?
Yeah, so for more information, go on to the website, which is taigacoolers.com. We are going to offer free shipping on any single item, as long as you give us the code FISHTaiga. So that's FISHTAIGA. And like I said, we'll give you free shipping on any item. But yeah, go on to the website, www.taigacoolers.com, and check everything out. We got everything on there to look at, and got any questions, or shoot us an email or give us a call.
I'd like to get back to the fly fishing just a little bit as we close out the show here. Why would you encourage people to take up fly fishing as an activity? Oh,
yeah, lots of reasons. But I think narrowing it down, it gets you out on the creeks. It allows you. It's a sport that it's not meant just for meat fishing. Just to go out and bring home dinner. It's a sport that kind of gets inside of you and stays there. You think about it all the time. There's You plan for it all the time. It's something that you can do wherever you go. If you're going on a business trip, if you're going on vacation somewhere, saltwater, freshwater, it doesn't matter. You can fly fish anywhere. And like we've seen, you can fly fish when the temperature of the water is, in the 90s. Fish are still there and fish are still biting. There's also the other side of it that we really didn't talk much about in fly tying, designing and creating your own flies. There are people that don't fly fish that just tie flies.
Right.
It was kind of crazy to think of, but hey, there's an art to it, and there's something about going out and watching a fish eating some type of, whether it's a fly or a midge or something, or a streamer or another bait fish or something, and then going home and trying to imitate that and take it back and presenting it to him and seeing if he'll go for it. So many different ways to get involved into fly fishing, and there's really no reason why you shouldn't.
I think that you kind of nailed it there. It's vast. It's not a shallow sport. This is one that you can do for a lifetime, and you get better at it every time you go out. But it's not automatic. It takes skill development, and then there's the fly tying, and there are all the different types of flies and the different types of fishing. You can nymph, you can streamer fish, you can dry fly fish, you can wet fly fish, you can do a dry dropper. There's so many different ways that you can present the fly to the fish. It's kind of like the never-ending sport, really.
It really is. Yeah, it doesn't ever end. It seems like that's a very good way to put it. I every year I plan for something new and different. This year, and I'm already planning for next year. Next year I want to learn how to catch the alligator or the long-nosed gar. See them in the rivers here all the time. I know there are people that fish for them, but I'm not interested in the typical kind of snaring them in a way, the way they typically fish for them. I want to figure out a way to fly fish for them. So, and to do it successfully, without hurting the fish. So that is going to be something I'm going to work on this year and go after next year. So yeah, every year there's something new to be working on. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What kind of a tippet would you have to use to keep them from cutting it with those teeth?
That's right. So that's going to be the trick. And you see a lot of guys that are regular rod and reel fishing with either a steel line or a steel tippet or some kind of really abrasive, resistant line, almost like yarn that they wrap themselves up in, and that's how you bring them in. So that's going to be part of the trick, is to figure out how to get something that and maybe it's just going to be some very, very strong tippet. I'm not completely sure. So yeah, that's what I got to figure out. I don't know. If you have some ideas, send them my way.
Well, it's a good illustration of how the sport never ends. It really doesn't. So,
yeah.
John, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Curtis. I appreciate it a lot. A lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about stuff we love, isn't it?
Oh, it is. You can go on for hours.
For all of our listeners out there, find a sport that you love, get out there, have some fun.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.